All right, everybody, welcome to the Center for International Policy and Defense at Queen's University. This is May 9th, 2025, and I am Paul Hook from the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research at Queen's University, a good collaborator and ally with CIDP. I am a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces and have been working with CIMVR for the past 2 years, so I know the two panelists quite well in my time working with CF Health Services and David Pedlar, the former scientific director of our organization. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to spend an hour with us today as we discuss a fantastic topic, Exercise Trillium Cura, understanding and preparing for a complicated health system issue. So before we get into the short 1 hour discussion, I'll let you know that I'll introduce our two guests, inform you that they will spend the first approximately 30 minutes discussing Exercise Trillium Cura, and then followed by question and answer. Because we're on Zoom, please put your questions in the Q&A section, and I'll ensure that they're either asked out loud to the appropriate guest or answer them as possible. We should have approximately 25 minutes for that, so I expect it to be a lively discussion. Please remember that this is all being recorded and that you can find the link to it on the CIDP website, and CIMVR will also be hosting it on our YouTube site. The report that will be discussed today is also available on the CIMVR website at www.cimvr.ca and is available through Canadian Forces Health Services. So before we get in, we'll do the bios of these two fantastic panelists. Brigadier General Colleen Forestier currently serves as the Director General Clinical Services in the Canadian Armed Forces. Prior to this position, she was Director Health Services Strategic Concepts at Canadian Forces Health Services. Brigadier General Forestier enrolled in the CAF in 2003 as a direct entry medical officer after working as a rural family physician in southern Alberta. She was first posted to 1 Field Ambulance and in 2006 to the Canadian Special Operations Regiment as a medical officer. She's been employed in a number of medical advisory and medical staff positions, including Command Surgeon for the Canadian Special Operations Command, Senior Staff Officer for Medical Policy and Standards, Regional Surgeon for Joint Task Force Atlantic in Halifax, and the Canadian Joint Operations Command Surgeon. She served as Director of Mental Health 2017 to 2019, as the Director of Health Services Operations 2020 to 2022, and then as Director of Health Services Strategic Concepts. Her deployment experience includes a tour in Kandahar, Afghanistan in 2005 and 2006 as part of the PRT during Op Archer, and in March 2015, she served as the Task Force Commander for Op Serona in Sierra Leone, the CAF's contribution to the fight against the Ebola virus in West Africa. Brigadier General Forestier completed a family medicine residency at the University of Calgary in 1998, earned the Certificate of Special Competence Emergency Medicine, and is a graduate of the Canadian Forces College National Security Program in 2020. Dr. David Pedlar is a professor in the School of Rehabilitation Therapy at Queen's University and senior scientist at the University of Ottawa, the Institute for Mental Health Research at the Royal. He is also a distinguished research and thought leader with an impressive track record advancing veteran, military, and family health research and policy in Canada and internationally. He is a two-time Fulbright Canada recipient as scholar and research chair. He has played a pivotal role in shaping veteran health research in Canada, securing major funding and leading multiple international collaborations. Since retiring as the scientific director of CIMVR from 2017 to 2024, he continues to serve as their strategic research advisor. He has advised governments and institutions worldwide, including serving as the strategic research advisor to many scientific advisory boards and international health system working groups. His leadership in veteran mental health research extends globally, with key roles in Canada, the US, the UK, Australia, and beyond. Without further ado, I will let the two panelists take the stage. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Brigadier General Colleen Forestier, and I just want to say thank you for CIDP for hosting us, and I look forward to having this discussion with regards to Trillium Cura. So today we'll be presenting, my colleague and I, Dr. Pedlar, will be presenting the outcomes of Exercise Trillium Cura. which was a provincial level tabletop exercise designed to examine sustained mass casualty repatriation and more broadly to demonstrate why health system preparedness must be understood as a national part of a national security strategy. As I'm going to be going through these slides to talk through a number of how the exercise itself was developed, the strategy behind it, and some of the lessons learned, after which I'll pass on to Dr. Pedlar to provide some insights from a policy perspective and an international perspective towards the end. We look forward to having this discussion and having the questions near the end. I'm going to be sharing my slides from my laptop here, so my apologies in advance if I end up with any challenges in this space. Like now. There we go. All right. So the presentation overview here is really as outlined on the slide. We're going to be talking about the strategic rationale for the exercise. I'll describe a little bit of the structure and the leadership involved in the exercise itself, both in its development and how it was run. I'll walk through a set of evidence-informed insights organized around core domains of health system functionality, leadership, service delivery, workforce supplies, and information, with each insight framed around a targeted opportunity for strategic strengthening. We'll then also go into the next steps and what we're doing to advance this work in the future. The first real question, though, is why a war game? And for those who don't know the picture on the slide there, this is Dr. Thomas Schelling, an American economist and a professor of foreign policy, national security, nuclear strategy, and arms control at the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland. He was also co-faculty at the New England Complex Systems Institute and was awarded the 2005 Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for having enhanced our understanding of conflict and cooperation through game theory analysis. So obviously a real clear underachiever, but who really understood the value of game theory in exploring complex systems and the importance of using that game theory in having hard and difficult conversations. So using a wargame model rather than a more common vignette-based tabletop exercise, it allowed us to look at this space a little differently and to introduce uncertainty and complexity in a way that we hadn't previously done in health system tabletop exercises. It also is sort of important to highlight that it really triggered some much needed conversation and some very difficult conversations around the table as we explored this particular tabletop exercise. But how do you create a wargame scenario or a wargame based on large-scale combat operations and sustained casualty movement when this had not been done previously? And to be truthful, it really did take a village. So the exercise leadership itself was quite involved and involved a number of players. It was coordinated through defense, trauma, public health, and military and veteran research. And that was really the strength and credibility of the exercise itself. It was co-designed and led by 4 individuals from across Canada, and I want to particularly give a big shout out to Dr. Staney Brown, Dean of the Della School of Public Health, who was a really remarkable champion in this space. We had members of the Canadian Forces Health Services, in particular, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Beckett, who was part of the trauma advisor to the Surgeon General and the Director of Trauma at St. Mike's Hospital. We involved the Canadian Forces Joint Warfare Center, in particular 2 wargame experts, Mr. Anthony Robb and David Redpath, who had never, ever been involved in anything involving the healthcare system and who took this on with with enthusiasm and curiosity. Dr. David Pedlar as well on the research side was another really important champion in moving this work forward, as well as Dr. Dan Klein, an emergency physician with Unity Health Toronto, who helped provide valuable insights in terms of the trauma system. And this is only a few of the individuals involved in this effort. There were many others that I haven't had the opportunity here to mention. But what I really wanted to highlight here was the fact that this was not military led alone. There were military inputs into creating the game, but it really was important to us that this was led by the civilian healthcare system, because that ultimately is where we need to be supported. So the game itself was held in November 2024, but that was after nearly 6 months of planning. And it was held as a strategy level wargame with the purpose to simulate the return of Canadian Armed Forces personnel requiring sustained care, specifically in Ontario, which is where we focused our energy and planning efforts. It was also to assess how Canada's health and defense systems would respond together. The exercise tested decision-making, coordination, and governance, and placed real-time pressure on participants to navigate uncertainties, allocate resources, and make strategic choices, all while balancing civilian and military health needs over a prolonged period of time. From the outset, the exercise was framed not only as a health system event, but as a national defense readiness initiative using an all-hazards approach. The findings are applicable to pandemics, climate disasters, and/or mass trauma events. This framing recognizes that health system preparedness cannot be siloed. It is central to national security, international stability, and public trust. Exercise Trillium Cura brought together more than 30 participants, 45 in the room, as well as a number of observers representing a cross-section of Canada's health, defense, and emergency management sectors. This was the largest gathering that we are aware of key leaders and stakeholders to come together for a civil military health system exercise. You'll see here, obviously, a number of players in their emblems. We had Canadian Armed Forces, Veterans Affairs Canada, Health Canada, Transport Canada, Public Safety. And then from the Ontario perspective, we had Ontario Health, Public Health Ontario, Emergency Management Ontario, Orange, and leading hospitals across the Greater Toronto Area. We had provinces send a number of observers from British Columbia, Alberta, Nova Scotia, and Quebec, and a number of academic institutes, which was incredibly important to the work being done here. University of Toronto, Queen's, Simver, and we had observers from Harvard and the German embassy as well. The strategic rationale here and behind that sort of carved out the reason for why we thought this was so important is that it reflects a critical opportunity for strengthening Canada's military and civilian healthcare systems. Currently, NATO partners are preparing for increased risk of conflict, including direct armed combat. However, lessons learned from Exercise Trillium Cura are being used to inform NATO preparations through awareness for an all-hazards approach, a frequently used term in health system defense. In Canada, specialized in inpatient care for members of the Canadian Armed Forces, including trauma care, surgery, and rehab, or some elements of rehab, is delivered by provincial health systems. We do not operate dedicated military hospitals, which means our ability to respond during prolonged combat operations depends on how well our civilian and military systems work together. The scenario of sustained casualty repatriation challenges us to prepare a coordinated, scalable response while also maintaining care for the civilian population. The exercise recognized that challenge as a strategic advantage, a chance to formalize partnerships, clarify operational roles, and build durable mechanisms for shared readiness. This particular slide depicts how we scaled and scoped the exercise itself. We could not take into account the entire journey of a military person injured in a combat operations in the European region, and it was simply too large. So what we did is we focused specifically on the left of that dotted line as patients arrived in Ontario. And again, we limited it to Ontario just to initiate this particular exercise. The entire journey of that returning casualty is actually quite complex, involving numerous steps along the way. And although this illustration is a simplified version, the focus was on the last bit of care, last bit but complex stage of care. The exercise was designed to simulate the sustained arrival of approximately 45 casualties per week, which is actually a fairly small number. If we look at the data from Ukraine and if we look at the data from World War II. But we wanted to start with something that was actually manageable in the course of this sustained exercise. So 45 casualties per week on average was the focus into the Ontario healthcare system. Exercise participants on the Provincial Patient Evacuation Coordination Centre were charged with triaging the war zone casualties as they arrived. And these were a series of cards that identified what the casualties' injuries were, how they were coming into the system, and what type of care they would need. To ensure accuracy, the capacity of the Ontario healthcare system was modeled using up-to-date capacity and occupancy data from the Ontario Ministry of Health and the Canadian Institute for Health Information. A conservative 5% of Ontario's health workforce was removed as a starting condition. This represents the portion of human health resources that may be deployed overseas during a large-scale casualty operation. And finally, the goal was to add additional challenges as the exercise evolved, such as chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear threats, local environmental disasters, cyber attacks, multi-drug resistant infections, and or public protests, which were intended to be done in such a way to introduce complexity, but not necessarily to introduce failure of the system. This particular slide identifies the turn sequence that was done multiple times throughout the 3 days of the event. It was held, the event itself was held at St. Mike's Hospital, and each turn sequence was a 7-step strategic part of the exercise itself. Step 1 was focused on generating the 45 approximately on average casualties. Step 2, the exercise participants were able to triage the casualties and identify where they would be best suited and where the care they could receive would be allocated to. Step 3 and 4 were opportunities for participants to adjust their care models and exercise influence onto public policy. Step 5 was to check the healthcare workforce for burnout or functionality of the hospital overload. Step 6 was a mortality assessment and to update the casualty cards. And step 7, which was a really important part of this discussion, was the media engagement, to challenge our participants in how to update media and their communication strategy given the turn of events over the previous 6 steps. These turns were adjusted and repeated multiple times. And each turn, we learned with each turn. So each turn created also an evolution in what we learned and how we adjusted as we went through. Certainly not perfect, but we did learn a great deal. And the results were very interesting. So the lessons learned, I'll go through these as best I can before I hand it to Dr. Pedlar. But the lessons learned sort of focused on I think, 5 themes here. Leadership and governance, in particular. The exercise itself highlighted an opportunity to strengthen national coordination for managing mass casualty repatriation, and that this type of activity requires national level oversight and command and control, as well as national level tracking of casualties. A national trauma registry could support this effort by improving real-time visibility and coordination. A patient evacuation coordination cell would need a cross-jurisdictional structure and support with shared decision-making and system-wide visibility to define the clear roles and responsibilities of each part of the health system. It also identified that not only the health system needs to be part of this discussion, but also that collaboration with elements such as public safety, Transport Canada, CBSA, among others, need to be part of that coordination cell. The demands of care for repatriated casualties will impact the functioning of a civilian healthcare system. Coordinated planning must consider how to manage these pressures while maintaining essential services to civilian as well as military members. A robust risk communication and community engagement strategy is essential to convey leadership decisions and build public trust. However, establishing national level messaging presents challenges, including who leads that messaging, how it is coordinated, how consensus is reached across multiple provincial health systems. Early collaboration with community organizations and charitable groups can foster comprehensive support for repatriated casualties and their families across their care journey. Messaging during sustained emergencies needs to be proactive, consistent, and publicly transparent, especially when military and civilian roles are intertwined. This would align federal, provincial, and clinical partners under a common framework. Lessons learned in the service delivery and operational capacity include the importance of coordinating prolonged care pathways at scale and identifying organizational responsibility for efficient transport across the casualty pathway for repatriation to onward care. This pathway may include multiple outcomes for each and every casualty. Those can include a transfer to a hospital, return to service, transition to Veterans Affairs Canada, transfer directly to rehab facilities. It could include medical release from service. So a key recommendation was to explore the establishment of dedicated national or regional hubs for receiving and re-triaging patients as they come through. This approach would support timely clinical decision-making and equitable patient distribution based on available resources, and would mimic in many ways the way that World War II established hubs in certain locations. However, alternative models, such as cohorting patients across multiple centers based on medical needs, may offer advantages by reducing unnecessary patient transport and limiting infection control risks, including exposure to antibiotic-resistant organisms. Further discussion is needed to weigh the benefits and limitations of each model. Another important recommendation is to explore the merits and demerits of existing incident management systems and to look at a framework for triage and patient evacuation coordination decision-making support with existing or AI solutions to improve casualty pathway algorithms. Also on the service delivery and operational capacity lessons learned framework is to look very specifically at the number of casualties that would require intensive and burn care, because during the exercise it became quickly evident that the needs would outstrip capacity at every single part of our system. Contingency plans should be developed to expand health system capacity in Canada, particularly in these specific areas, and to include actionable plans for surge readiness, including personnel, infrastructure, and supply strategies. Since it is possible that non-Canadian allied casualties may be repatriated as well, management and care of non-Canadian casualties need to be viewed from an interagency administrative readiness perspective. Currently, NATO is developing some alliance-wide policies pertaining to this. And this may play a role in Canada's role to support any conflict going on in Europe to help decant the stretched healthcare systems overseas by providing an opportunity for non-Canadians to be moved into our systems. And that is something we need to plan for. One of the latter stages of the casualties journey is rehab. And the longer the conflict, the more casualties that will require rehab care. Modeling completed by the exercise revealed that rehab capacity will be amongst the most stressed and overloaded parts of the healthcare system. A working group will be needed to explore mental health capacities and resources as well, and how to extend these capacities to ensure casualties and their families have access to timely, appropriate, coordinated, and ongoing health care. Examples of rehab needs may include prosthetic care for amputations, skin grafting for burn injuries, and other complex recovery supports. Lessons learned in the health workforce domain were multiple. It certainly highlighted the role of health workforce as a critical enabler of operational continuity. I don't think that would come as a surprise to anyone online. But to prepare for sustained emergency scenarios, an increased number of health workers across multiple domains will be required. Potentially more than 5% of the workforce was identified as likely being deployed. And this creates additional burden on an already stretched workforce, particularly the workforce that has highly specialized skills such as burn care, plastics, and the complex rehabilitation domain, and nursing care. Providing care during crises, as seen during the pandemic, places significant and far-reaching strains on a health workforce. Interprovincial credentialing mechanisms may assist in rapid deployment of qualified personnel across jurisdictions where they're needed the most, but it is not a long-term solution. Strategic planning for patient distribution should account for scalability, maximizing scopes of practice, extending scopes of practice, regional capacity differences, and the need to maintain specialized care pathways during a mass casualty scenario. Decisions about how and where to distribute patients must also consider infrastructure limitations, transport logistics, and infection prevention control, which is of a significant concern in the Ukraine conflict at the moment. Open and realistic discussions about models of care in the event of an overwhelmed healthcare system need to be revisited before emergencies happen. And lastly, workforce resilience must embed supports for mental health and peer connection to allow critical enablers working in high stress prolonged scenarios to be supported through that environment. Lessons learned in the medical products and technology domain. Conflict will likely disrupt manufacturing and supply chains. I kind of say will likely, it will disrupt manufacturing and supply chains for key healthcare materials. Of particular note is national coordination of critical products, including blood components, skin grafts, burn dressings, and trauma-related pharmaceuticals will be required. Clarifying roles and responsibilities, again, across jurisdictions, federal, provincial, and institutional, is key to ensuring reliable access during high-pressure scenarios, especially when they're prolonged. Coordinated planning for transport, storage conditions, and rapid distribution, particularly for temperature-sensitive materials like blood and biological dressings, is needed. And this isn't just about logistics. It's about integrating medical supply systems into Canada's broader operational readiness strategy, ensuring that resources are pre-positioned, tracked, and deployable under sustained pressure. In the information systems domain, which is very complex, as many of us know, real-time information systems are required to support multidisciplinary coordination. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anyone. Legal and privacy aspects have to be considered when sharing casualty information. Specific medical information pertaining to military casualties may be classified differently in the federal system than in the provincial system. And this could limit the electronic systems by which the information can be shared and the healthcare organizations that need access to that information. Military, federal, and provincial healthcare systems of record must be examined so that casualty information can be more easily shared. This includes trauma registry or pan-Canadian patient registries to track patient movements, bed capacity, and system status across regions. Of particular note is that cyber attacks on health infrastructure must be considered and prepared for, as all digital healthcare information systems are vulnerable, especially during a conflict. Efforts to strengthen cybersecurity as part of preparedness planning is absolutely required. So what are the implications for Canadian healthcare system? I think what's really important here is that the insights from Exercise Trillium Cura point to a core message. Canada's health system is a strategic national asset. Although COVID lessons learned played a role in the exercise's preparedness, and for many people around the table participating in this activity, they had been involved directly as part of the COVID response for their particular institution, as part of the provincial system, or even the national system. But a key takeaway from the exercise is there are inherent differences between a pandemic and a sustained mass casualty event, and bringing individuals at scale from abroad into the healthcare system. So strengthening emergency health preparedness directly supports national defense and security, public protection, and mission assurance in both military and civilian contexts. Civilian military health coordination enhances our collective capacity to respond to prolonged or high impact events, whether they are combat related, environmental, or health driven. These efforts also build public trust, showing that government systems are aligned, coordinated, and acting in the best interest of Canadians. Finally, this approach elevates Canada's role in health system security and civil military coordination and cooperation, a space that Canadians value and helps drive innovation. So the 5 strategic recommendations represent practical next steps to enhance Canada's health system readiness as a strategic defense function. First, the establishment of patient coordination cells, clearly mandated, resourced, and embedded within Canada's emergency architecture, would address a core operational need. Expanding surge planning beyond general capacity. This includes personnel specialized services like burns and rehabilitation and critical logistics support. We recommend full integration of healthcare supply chain and digital systems into national preparedness plans, treating these as active components of emergency deployment. Fourth, civil military health system coordination should be formalized with interoperable governance, shared communication strategies, and real-time role alignment. Finally, any future planning must include mental health supports and public engagement strategies, key pillars of a sustainable, ethical, and trust-based response. Our next steps are significant and work is really underway already for what I'm going to bring to the table here. The next step is to scale and extend this work and develop a national tabletop preparedness exercise in the fall of 2025. And I want to give a big shout out to the University of Toronto, Dr. Staney Brown, who again is leading the charge in this domain, along with Simber, Dr. Pedlar, Health Canada, and a number of and our Ontario counterparts who were instrumental in making this work the first time round. But to expand it to multiple provinces and include a national coordination cell as part of this work to extend the coordination role. And with this next phase, we aim to support Canada in health system preparedness, military-civilian integration, and long-term crisis coordination. So this concludes my portion of it. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Pedlar, who will summarize the broader civilian and international policy context and how we are going to continue to move this work forward. Over to you, Dr. Pedlar.
Well, thank you to Brigadier Forestier for the presentation, Paul Hook for facilitating, and to Dr. Doherty Skippin on the Simber team who helped us organize the presentation and organize our ideas around the presentation. I'm going to just make a few post-conclusion comments around the presentation that go outside of the actual event or Exercise Trillium Cura event itself. I think it's an opportunity to highlight just for a few minutes how some of the factors that caused Exercise Trillium Cura to become a priority for us last year have become even more persuasive in underlining the need to expand this kinds of exercise to a pan-Canadian level, as Brigadier Forestier just suggested. Last year, when we started working on Exercise Trillium Cura, although public awareness of risk of conflict causing casualties for Canada was low, there was already growing alarm in military and public domains in European and NATO nations that armed conflict with NATO, specifically NATO and Russia, was increasingly likely. And today, that threat of conflict is even more likely. Over the past year, NATO nations have stepped up short and long-term preparedness for conflict, be that kinetic in nature, cyber, misinformation, disinformation, or others. And there is a collective interest in health system resilience as a part of this effort that's taking place. And so, for example, in recent months, we learned that US support for Ukraine is clearly wavering, and that NATO allies are facing the real possibility of having to counter Russia without US military involvement. So as many of you well know here, Canada has a relatively strong presence in Eastern and Central Europe. The CAF's Operation Reassurance is currently Canada's largest overseas mission, and Canada leads the multinational brigade in Latvia. In Latvia, approximately 1,900 CAF members are present, with plans to increase to 2,200 members by 2026 as part of what's called Enhanced Forward Presence. So what has long been recognized that maintaining the health of fighting forces is critical to the success on the battlefield. And as highlighted today, like many NATO member nations, except the US, the Canadian Armed Forces depends on the civilian healthcare system, especially for all levels of hospital services, specialist and diagnostic services, and long-term rehabilitation outside of the deployed setting. Heightened risk of conflict increases need for preparedness and to set civilian military health system planning and cooperation as a high priority. Exercise Trillium Cura highlighted how a sustained flow of casualties would shock and stress Canada's burdened health systems, but it also gave us guidance that we wouldn't have had otherwise about how to prepare and manage for this burden. So coming towards a conclusion, we cannot overlook the need for preparedness and with this focus on an all hazards approach to increasing the resilience of Canada's healthcare system and collaboration with the Canadian Armed Forces. This means that what we have learned from this exercise will also support the resilience of the healthcare system in times of natural disasters, pandemics, and other health crises. The exercise also raises the question of whether healthcare cooperation and healthcare system resilience should be highlighted further in Canada's defense and security strategies. A second development I'm going to mention since last year is an international effort to support the performance of healthcare organizations and systems and how to improve resilience that we're now part of. The group is named the Harvard Scholarly Working Group on Enhancing the Resilience of Healthcare Systems that formed in December of 2024. The Harvard University Global Health-led group aims to develop practical tools for decision makers and leaders to help them identify and mitigate health system vulnerabilities and try to integrate health system resilience assessment into the ongoing management and planning. This effort will help us all to practically answer the question, how can we assess and mitigate threats to the key components of healthcare systems, like system financing, healthcare workforce, payment information systems, supply chains, government governance, communication, and patient health information. And Ukraine gives us some examples. For example, in Ukraine, that we see every day in the media, despite day after day of attack, that includes the direct targeting of healthcare facilities. By and large, the healthcare system for military and civilians is still functioning. So that's an example of resilience. A key factor in its functioning has been focus on healthcare system financing that has remained relatively secure throughout the war. So this work with the Harvard group is allowing us to take a finer grained, multidimensional look at this problem, which will provide a helpful foundation for a pan-Canadian event. So we've shown that Exercise Trillium Cura is an important step in increasing health system resilience, and it's already improved civilian-military cooperation in Canada, primarily through Ontario. This exercise in our collaboration with the Harvard group is a step towards an enhanced pan-Canadian tabletop that General Forestier just mentioned, and I'm really excited that this work is underway. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you to you both for the presentation. That was excellent. Just from my side as a former combat arms officer, it's great to see that the tabletop exercise is looking at this before something actually happens, because, you know, if you're deployed in a combat zone and you see your colleagues injured and have to be transported back through the roll 1 to 4 system, you hope that something like this has been planned. And I think if this got out to the larger and broader Canadian Armed Forces community, it would give them a lot of confidence, you know, that something has been planned to take care of them from point of injury all the way back to rehabilitation and back to their families. So thank you for that. I'll start off with one question here, and we'll see if General Forestier can answer this one. So in each turn during the tabletop, you said that it was more of an iterative approach because you were learning as you went along. Did that build confidence in the participants? Because if they had seen what had happened during the pandemic, and this was kind of different from a pandemic, understanding their roles, but then understanding each other's roles, did that build confidence throughout?
That's a great question. And yes, it did. And the reason I wanted to mention sort of, I think we were learning too, the gamers who developed the war game were learning. One of the really interesting dynamics that I've noticed before is, especially when you get a lot of clinicians in the room, there's initially a lot of clinical discussion sort of at the clinical level. And then slowly but surely we were able to kind of move into the system discussions and how does this look more systemically, and the discussions across the table between those who were actually participants in the actual exercise. We couldn't we couldn't put all 47 people as participants. It would have been too big. So there were 45 or 47 people in the room, plus those online. And then there was a smaller group that were the active participants in the actual decision making and the each of the turns. So yes, the each turn became smoother. The conversations got more geared towards this particular crisis and a little bit less focused on how things had been done in COVID or what had worked during COVID.
Right.
And you started to see just the entire decision-making process shift a little bit and build confidence amongst all of those participants between systems and who needed to be engaged in what decision-making. I think one of the yeah, I'll leave it there. I was going to say that there was one kind of really interesting space, but now I forgot what I was going to say, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. So we have 3 questions queued right now. So I'll bring this to Dr. Pedlar just because you spoke about the policy issues and implications afterward. Was the privatization of provincial healthcare systems considered in this exercise? And if yes, are there any recommendations around mitigating any of those issues from privatization?
That is a good question. Do you know the answer to that, Colleen? I can't remember where that.
Honestly, I don't think we
Yeah.
touched on that one, but it's a really great point, and I think we're going to write that one in from a national perspective, because it does raise some interesting points for Canadian Armed Forces members, because we're not technically insured under the provincial healthcare systems. We provide care through a on a contracted basis through Blue Cross. So accessing those private systems may look a little bit differently, but for someone coming external or a non-Canadian coming into the system, it also may have a different implication. But it is a really good question. I'm going to write that one down because I think it needs to be part of the discussion and part of how we actually question and discuss capacities within each jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Excellent. And the next question here is from our esteemed colleague, Dr. Lisa Garland-Baird at Veterans Affairs Canada. So from the perspective of a body of research findings that speak to the needs of veterans' health and well-being and their access and use of health social care services, have there been any considerations for preparing and educating interdisciplinary health professionals in military veteran cultural competencies and trauma-informed care, so inclusive of equity-deserving members and veterans, with additional considerations for HPs healthcare professionals who work in critical care and acute rehab and community health settings? So I'll let either of you answer that one.
Well, first of all, these tools do exist now, to my understanding, that there is a training that's been developed related to improving understanding the veteran context of care specifically. So in the case of if Canada got into direct conflict, really everything would change quite quickly around the priorities related to veteran care, like they did like they have in previous conflicts. And so, I assume that this would be would become a high priority in terms of the cultural context around veteran care. Some of it would also be determined by the kind of conflict. So, Afghanistan was a insurgency war, but let's just say that this was more of a artillery war, like it is for Ukraine. The mechanism, types of injuries, and the need for long-term rehabilitation, and the numbers might approximate more like World War II as a model, with long phases of rehabilitation. A lot of the major injuries in Ukraine, for example, are amputation and facial reconstruction surgeries and very complex injuries. And so I think it would really require a veteran context, which is now available but is probably not as implemented as it could be across the country.
Okay. We
Can
have
I,
a great,
can I just
oh,
add
sure.
something to that one?
Yes, by all means.
Very quickly. So I just want to sort of identify, this was part of there was a cultural consideration because when we were talking about the hubs and realizing that actually what was done in World War II with Sunnybrook and some of the rehab hospitals was specifically around having soldiers rehab with other soldiers in that context. And that was part of the discussion as we were refining what would this look like on a long-term scale. And there was also a discussion around maybe at some point having a follow-on, you deal with the casualties as they come in, but having a secondary tabletop exercise specifically to address the implications on the back end of the health system. What does that look like? Not just in the first few weeks or few months, but what are the implications in the long term? So it's a great question, and it was part of the discussion. We didn't dig into it quite in the same way that the person asking the question did, though.
Excellent. And I think you just answered one of two questions from Mr. Bill Hutchins. So the impact of civilians already in the healthcare system, and you spoke of that. The other one is actually quite good because when we talk in the military about deployments, everyone has to be declared operationally ready. So they go through a series of exercises, and somebody who is the authority thinks that they've gone through all the gateways and gives them the checkbox that that group is declared operationally ready to deploy. So was there an actual timeline or deadline to achieve a quote confident level of readiness based on the results of this exercise? And assuming that this was discussed at a higher level within the military and within the provincial healthcare system, what is that timeline if there was one discussed?
You want to go, David?
No, it's an interesting question. So this is really helpful for thinking through what we do in our next phase. So.
And I think I could probably help answer that. So
Yeah.
because this exercise actually was pushed from the grassroots up and not from the top down, um, you don't really get that the deadline or the timeline to have a high confidence. But I think maybe with a national level exercise, if you're looking at more provinces being involved in a national coordination center, once that they look at that, that could be a great question to come in there. If we're, and as Dr. Pedlar stated, with the U.S. having less and less of a role in Ukraine, if in the future there is a large scale combat operation, this becomes more important. What would the deadline be to actually have this run through, especially with the strategic recommendations that were put in place?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, what does ready look like in this context? This is the first kind of this type of exercise we'd ever done. And even the ability to have develop these relationships with our civilian counterparts to help understand each other's constraints and challenges and how we would adapt in times of crisis was a big step forward. And then identifying what does readiness look like. And I feel like this will be a continuous iterative approach because we also have to remember that the relationships we build, these people will change positions, they will change departments. And so we need to be sort of constantly moving towards it. That said, there are some very specific areas where we need to pay attention to, the medical supply chain being a huge one that really does need to be adapted and invested in such a way that we have a lot more autonomy. We are highly, highly dependent on other systems right now that are vulnerable.
Perfect. So we have two more questions here. I'll take the first one. Within Canada, emergencies arising from natural hazards and disasters has a complicated federal provincial approval process for health services. Would regional prior approval authority be better in this case?
Are you familiar with that one, Colleen?
I am, and it is a complex approval. There's a request for assistance that has to come up. There has to be a determination of whether this is the force of last resort, request for assistance up through public safety, and then over to Canadian Armed Forces, identification of what the needs are. So yes, it is. At the same point, it's I think being able to have clarity of roles, responsibilities, and the governance process for how health fits into the emergency management system more effectively is kind of what we're after, so that health isn't necessarily considered as an afterthought, or health services aren't asked for at the last minute. So trying to prepare, identify what the limitations are in each of the systems, where we can support most effectively is really what we're aiming to achieve through these. I know that during COVID, there was kind of a structure put in place where the process was simplified because there were so many requests for assistance coming through. And I suppose that that same format might be adopted if this was the same approach being required. But I think what's important in an emergency, a national disaster space, we're dealing with something that looks a little bit different than a sustained mass casualty scenario from overseas, because all of our health services would be likely deployed, or the vast majority of them. In a natural disaster space, we're dealing with the ability to either support for short periods of time or episodically as needed. So it's a little bit of a different framework, but ultimately it's going to be about developing the governance and the relationships needed to
Right.
make sure that goes as smoothly as possible. Thanks.
Thank you. And we have time for one last question here. So this is from Karen Breek. Curious to know what assumptions were made, if any, for the role and need of also using U.S. strategic evacuation resources or military hospitals in order for Canada to get high numbers of injured military members back home from out of Canada locations. And before this is answered, I will say that Dr. Pedlar sent me a great article that came out from the U.S. in March of 2025. And it's called "To Conserve Fighting Strength in Large-Scale Combat Operations." And I'm not a medical person at all, but I do love how the operations and planning function looks like. And this is a great article to talk about that. And I was absolutely astonished at the lack of ability for the U.S. military, much like other militaries, to do some large LISCO, as they call it. So I'll let either of you answer this question.
Colin, you might know more directly what's going on right now,
Yeah.
especially since this could involve questions that we don't know about NATO as well, and the U.S. role.
Yeah.
I know that we're highly engaged and have been dependent with certain roles of our care with the United States, depending on the operations. So,
Right.
I'll definitely leave this practical question to you.
So it is a good question. First, I'll ask Paul, you should maybe put that article link in the chat for folks
Sure.
now that you've mentioned it. It's a good question, because although we briefly discussed what would that look like and what is the US model, we didn't look at it specifically. We took into account or made the assumption that the US would not be able to support the additional load of CAF personnel, or that we would be responsible for. We did discuss, though, having perhaps some US representation at future ones to be able to provide some input, and recognize that some of these transport of opportunity may result in some of our casualties ending up in the US and then having to figure out how to bring them back into Canada, or vice versa. So part of that was discussed conceptually, but we didn't actually dig into sort of the specific. We didn't get into it in any kind of granularity, except recognizing that some of this might be a transport of opportunity, including allies, and resulting in Canadian personnel or eligible personnel in other countries that we would have to consider. So it is part of the future iteration that we need to be thinking about in the future, and working more closely with our US partners, because they do a similar hub type of model where they use a single hub and then distribute based on capacity to other areas as well.
Excellent. Thank you. So that pretty much wraps up the hour. I will leave with one parting note, and I did put the link for the article in the chat. So thank you for that suggestion, General. Pertaining to operational readiness strategy, planning, and gaming, these potential scenarios will save lives, and this is my humble opinion. This tabletop exercise and future ones like it, as discussed, are critical, and Canada needs to take care of its most precious resource, its people. We must serve those who serve us, and I thank both of you and everybody that participated in this tabletop exercise for the work that you're doing to support members of the Canadian Armed Forces and the health services community. So thank you very much, and thank you to everybody here for participating today in the webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.